Welcome to a new program for the Fatima Center. It's called Your Questions Answered with Father Nicholas Gruner. And what we're doing is we're inviting you to send your questions in, and then each day we'll have a little 5-minute YouTube video where a question will be answered. Father Gruner will take your question and answer it. And we're going to pretty much do one question per shoot, as it were. And this will be a daily thing from Monday to Friday, so you can tune in and keep track. And please contact us with your questions. The email is questions@thefatimacenter.com. I believe we have it on the screen right now. Questions@thefatimacenter.com. So we're just going to get right to the first question, which of course has to do with Fatima and the consecration of Russia. So basically the question is what is the consecration of Russia, this that Our Lady asked about, and what is consecration?
Well, as you know, of course, Our Lady asked for many different things, not that many, but the rosary and the scapular and to consecrate ourselves personally to her Immaculate Heart. But when we talk about the consecration, of course, we must be referring to the consecration of Russia. Well, to consecrate anything or anybody is to set it aside. So if this is not a chalice, as you know, it's a cup, but if it were a chalice, it is said before a priest uses it at Mass, it would be consecrated. That means it would be blessed with a special prayer, special blessing, and set aside. So we couldn't be drinking beer out of it afterwards or using it at a party somewhere. It'd only be used in a sacred function. It could be used at Mass. It could be used for communion if you only had that instead of the ciborium or something like that. But it's used only it's set aside exclusively for a sacred purpose, for the service of God or for the service of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So to set something aside is to mean what consecration means. So the consecration, of course, that we're talking about at Fatima is to set aside, to consecrate. And the word consecrate is used in, you find that in the Old Testament, the New Testament. You find David was consecrated as king. And of course, the king was not just the ruler, but he's appointed in authority by God. And so the prophet consecrated him. He poured oil, sacred oil, over his head and said a prayer over him, consecrating him in the name of God, saying that God was putting him aside, making him the king. And so the same thing with in the New Testament we find Saul and Barnabas, and God speaks through the Holy Ghost speaks through the prophets at the time, said, set aside for me, another word for consecrate, set aside for my service Saul and Barnabas.
Is it true to say too that we could kind of understand it that God will work through this individual or this consecrated thing once it's consecrated, once it's dedicated to his service?
Well, we see, for example, in David's case, everyone knows the story about David and Goliath. Goliath was a big man, a giant. In fact, he's cried out for 40 days and nights, saying to the men of Israel, here's the whole nation of Israel, and they cried out, is there not one man among you who will take me on? Obviously, this giant of a man, no one dared take him on. But here's this 18-year-old boy who's never fought in battle before, says, I'll take him on. So David won, as we all know, but people don't put it together is that why his king Saul let him fight that battle is because David already killed a bear barehandedly, without any weapon, all by himself. So I don't know too many men who will take on a 400-pound bear and struggle with it to the death. And so because David had been consecrated, God protected him, gave him a special protection because of his special consecration. And therefore he could kill a bear, he could kill a lion, and he could kill Goliath, and without getting hurt himself. And so a consecration is there's a blessing, it's a very special blessing. It's a very particular blessing. It goes, and people are sometimes confused, there's been the consecration of the world, to the Sacred Heart, for example, in 1898, if I recall, and again in 1942, the consecration of the world to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. But that's a generic consecration. We're talking here, David, he had 7 brothers, and the prophet Samuel said, no, not this one, the first one, not the second one, not the third one, the 4th, 5th, 6th. He saw them all. He said, no, none of them. And he asked David's father, do you have any more sons? And he said, yes, I have one more. He's back taking care of the sheep. He said, bring him to me. He recognized him as the one who should be consecrated. So it was a specific consecration. David alone was consecrated.
Right, not the entire family,
yes,
just
right.
David himself.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to, in our next program, our next little segment, what we're going to talk about then is the specific request of consecrating Russia. Why Russia and not another nation? And we will deal with that in our next installment.